Alright, so today I want to compare the difference between the candy ball python and the toffee ball python. These are both a type of albino and they're extremely similar. As a matter of fact, a lot of people think that the candy and the toffee are exactly the same gene. I've actually seen a lot of people over on Morph Market listing snakes as a candy slash toffee. I've actually seen some other people that think they're two different lines of the same gene, that the candy is a little bit different than the toffee, and some people are convinced that the candy is completely separate than the toffee. And when it comes to albinos, it's kind of interesting with the candy and the toffee. They're actually compatible with certain types of albinos. You actually have, for example, you actually have the lavender albino, the caramel albino, the regular albino, and then you have genes like the rainbow, which I guess you could consider to be a type of albino. And if you actually mix those albinos with the candy or the toffee, sometimes they're incompatible, where you get normal looking double hets, and sometimes you'll actually get a visual albino looking snake, even though it's het for two different types of albino. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to take a closer look at the differences between the candy ball python and the toffee ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here at morphmarket.com and I want to start with this snake right here. This is a candy ball python. And the interesting thing with the candy and the toffee is they both go through a dramatic color change as they age and mature. So take a look at this one. I actually pulled this one up over here on Morph Market, and this one is 85 grams. So it's just a hatchling, pretty much right out of the egg at 85 grams. And you can actually see it looks pretty much like just a regular albino with a really bright white background, really bright yellow patterns. And a lot of times with the candies and the toffees, they'll actually have really bright red eyes as hatchlings. And take a look at what happens to the candy as it ages and matures. I actually pulled up this adult male candy and take a look at this, how it really transforms into this completely different color. It loses all the bright yellows and transforms into kind of a caramel looking colored snake, which is pretty amazing. If you actually look at this one, the eyes change too. You can actually see it has darker, if you actually look at the eyes on an adult male candy, a lot of times it'll be like a ruby red, kind of a really dark red eyes. It doesn't have the really bright red eyes that you'd see in an albino. So this is the candy transformation. And if you actually look at the toffee pretty much does the same thing. Here is a toffee hatchling, which is pretty much like, almost exactly like a regular albino. And kind of the interesting thing I thought with this particular snake, this is over here on the World of Ball Pythons. You'll actually see some paradoxing on this. You see a lot of this kind of random black color they call paradoxing. It seems like it's really prevalent on a lot of your albinos, which is kind of interesting, and it seems like it kind of transfers over to the toffees and the candies. So this is the hatchling toffee, and if you actually look at the adult toffee, take a look at this, how it really transfers pretty much into the same kind of a snake as the candy. It really loses the bright yellow, turns into like a caramel colored snake, and the eyes also change too, which is pretty amazing. So take a look at this. This is actually just a regular albino. This is pretty much one of the few albinos that really keep its really bright white color as far as the background. So this albino is, I'd say you just call it the regular albino. There's really no other like common name. It's kind of interesting. You have to call it the regular albino because there's the lavender albino and the caramel albino to kind of distinguish it. So this is just the plain albino. And the albino is kind of interesting because it's compatible with the toffee and the candy. So for example, if you took an albino and you crossed it with the candy or the toffee, this is what you would end up with. You'd end up with a candino in the case of a candy. And kind of the complicated thing about this is, take a look at this. So this is technically 100% het for albino, 100% het for candy. It's a double het, which actually looks like an albino. And kind of the interesting thing with the candinos is they'll also go through a really big color change from a hatchling to an adult. So take a look at this. This is an older candino, and it completely changes into a different color. So if you actually look at the candinos versus like the candy just by itself, usually the candinos don't have the intense definition that you'd see with the candy. The albino kind of fades it out a little bit to where it doesn't doesn't have the high contrast and it's not quite as bright and defined as you'd see in the candy. So I thought this was kind of interesting. If you actually look at a whole bunch of different candinos, it seems like some of them will actually kind of transition into this purple color. So I've actually seen a lot of them, what they'll actually do is sometimes you'll see that they turn into this almost like a caramel orange color as far as the background, which originally starts out as white as a hatchling. And then a lot of times as they get a little bit older, sometimes it'll turn into this color. And then once they reach maturity and get even older, it'll actually transform into a purplish color, which is kind of interesting. And I've actually seen, it seems like even within the candies and the candinos, there is different versions of the candies. Some of them really turn purple a lot earlier than some of the other ones. Some of them kind of turn the caramel color first and then turn purple later on in life. And some of them, it seems like even as juveniles, a lot of times they'll have a lot of purple color in the mix, which is kind of interesting. So it's kind of the same way with the toffinos. So you can make the toffinos or the candinos based on the version of the toffee or candy that you're actually working with. They pretty much work exactly the same with the albino. So this one's 100% het albino, 100% het toffee. It's a visual double het, which is pretty amazing. So here's where things get a little bit complicated. So for example, you can actually take two candinos and breed them together. And this is kind of interesting. So for example, you can actually come over here to the world of Ball Python's genetic wizard and type in het albino, het candy, breed a candino to a candino, hit calculate, and essentially what you'll get is you'll get 25% albinos, 25% candies, and 50% candinos. And typically I would say, you know, on a lot of these projects that are really close together, a lot of times I kind of avoid recommending a project like this because it can get really complicated. All right, do I have an albino, do I have a candy, or do I have a candino? And this project, you can definitely tell the difference. I've seen some people do this, and essentially what they do is a lot of people say when they have hatchlings and they have a whole mix of the albinos, the candies, and the candinos, a lot of times when they first hatch out, they all look pretty much exactly the same, and you can't tell the difference between the three. But they say usually the ones that really start changing the color first, you get the kind of the purplish or kind of the caramely color of the background changing first. You'll actually see the candies changing first, and then a little bit later on you'll see the candinos develop that background color a little bit later on, where your albinos will keep the really bright white background. So you can actually do this. A lot of times people will recommend that if you produce a whole bunch of different hatchlings like this, that you kind of give them a month or two to kind of develop the color of the background so you can tell the difference between them. I've actually seen some people, when they're looking at the difference between these three as hatchlings, a lot of times they'll look at the background color of the snake and they'll look at the color of the eyes. Usually on the pure candies, you'll get the eyes turning dark a little bit faster than you would on the candinos. And usually with the albinos, they really retain the really bright eyes, which is kind of wild. So here is the big difference between the candies and the toffees. If you actually come over here on morphmarket.com, there's 4 times as many candies listed over here on Morph Market. There's actually 466 candies over here. This is under the United States region. And if you actually look at the toffees, believe it or not, there's only 97 toffees over here. And it's kind of interesting if you look at the difference in the names between the candy and the toffee. I think people are more attracted to the candy name versus the toffee. I think it's just the name itself. It's kind of interesting. It's almost like looking at the difference between the Coral Glow and the banana. I think so many people are just attracted to the name banana versus Coral Glow that there's so many more bananas over here on Morph Market. It's kind of interesting how the name seems to sell more examples of a certain gene versus another really similar example of this, of pretty much the same exact gene, which is pretty wild. So here is pretty much the #1 thing that most people, if they're going for candy or toffee, they actually go for the candy pied. I've actually seen quite a few of these over here, and it's kind of an interesting combination. It almost looks like an albino pied, but you actually get a lot of this color coming in. You kind of get the lavender color or like the two-tone orange coming in a lot of your older candy pies. As a matter of fact, if you actually look at the size on this one, this is 250 grams, so already at 250 grams, it's actually bringing in a lot of the purple color. And kind of the thing that really blew me away with the candy pies is if you look at the prices on these things, this is pretty wild. This is actually one that's still for sale, a 2020 that's actually selling for $5,500, which is kind of wild because you can actually pick up a pie for just a few $100s, and you can pick up a candy. I've seen them for anywhere from like $300 to $600 just for a candy, and you pick up a few snakes that are just a few $100s, and then you breed them together. And of course this is a double recessive, so it's a little bit more challenging, but it's pretty amazing how high this is, even compared to like your albino pies, which sell for about $1,000, and then your lavender albino pies, the dreamsicles, they're selling for, I'd say, probably $2,000 to $2,500, something like this. And this is even double what a dreamsicle is. Pretty amazing that you can get that much for a candy pied, which is pretty wild. So there's another gene that's really close to the toffee and the candy, and that is the lavender albino. It pretty much is, I'd say they're really close together. As a matter of fact, if you actually look at the lavender albino hatchlings, they look pretty much like the regular albinos, and they change colors similar to the toffee and the candy, but the difference between them is usually the lavender albinos will actually bring in more of a lavender color versus kind of going to the caramel color and then back to a lavender color, and they're definitely not compatible. So take a look at this. I actually pulled up this snake over here. This is a cinnamon double het for lavender and candino, which gets a little bit complicated. So take a look at this. This is actually the genetics behind this snake here. I thought this was pretty interesting. This is actually 100% het lavender. So someone took a visual lavender and bred it to another snake to get 100% het lavender, and then they actually bred this to a candino. So keep in mind the candino is het for albino and het for candy. So technically this snake right here doesn't contain all of these genes. They assume that you know the genetics on this one. So essentially what this is 100% het lavender albino, and it's either het for albino or het for candy. If it was actually het for both, you'd actually see the visual appearance. It would actually look like an albino snake. So it's kind of interesting. The lavender albino is not compatible with the candy or the regular albino. So if you ask me if the candy and the toffee are the same exact gene, I would probably tend to say yes. I do think, based on what I'm seeing here, and kind of the difficult part between the candy and the toffee, if you're actually comparing them side by side, there's really a lot of variation within each gene. So I've seen a lot of candies that turn more of a purplish color when they're younger, and some of them that turn kind of the orange caramel color for the background, and then sometimes they'll actually go from that orange color to a purple color. And it's kind of the same way with the toffees too. So if you're comparing them side by side, I'd say there's variations within each one, but I think you could pick out certain examples of each gene, compare those side by side, and they would pretty much be exactly the same gene. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Elijah Simpson asks, what would you get when you breed a blue-eyed leucistic to an 8-ball? And that is a very good question. So essentially what you have is you have a blue-eyed leucistic, which is an all-white snake with bright blue eyes, and you breed that to an 8-ball, which is a completely patternless black snake. So you're taking a white snake and you're breeding it to a black snake. And as far as what you'd get as the results, I'd say it's a little bit complicated. It depends what the genes are in your blue-eyed leucistic. So for example, if you actually made a blue-eyed leucistic with the super bamboo, you can actually take a bamboo like I have around my neck here. This is Bobby, my 7-year-old bamboo ball python. If you actually took Bobby and you bred it to another bamboo, 25% of the time you'd get a super bamboo, which is an all-white snake with blue eyes. And if you took a super bamboo and you bred it to an 8-ball, pretty much all your offspring would look like dark bamboos. They'd all have dark genes and they'd all look like bamboos. So you'd get bamboos black pastels and you would get bamboos cinnamons. And it's pretty much the same thing with any other gene you work into the blue-eyed cystic. There's like 40 different ways that you can make an all-white snake with blue eyes. So you can actually use a bamboo lesser. Both genes are in the blue-eyed leucistic. So that white snake, if you bred it to an 8-ball, you'd get half dark lessers and half dark bamboos working in the cinnamon and the black pastel, which is kind of interesting. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.